Darth Vader's life as a Jedi Knight and Sith Lord has brought him to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and has exposed him to some of the most bizarre encounters he had ever come across, let alone anybody ever came across, as he spent his years hunting down and slaughtering Jedi Knights and rebels alike on distant, unnamed worlds. Vader came across a myriad of different creatures and individuals, but perhaps one of the strangest encounters was during his duel with his former master, Obi-Wan Kenobi. After encountering Obi-Wan for the first time in nearly 10 years, Vader was finally able to corner his former master on the Death Star, confining him into the tight quarters of the Imperial corridors for their final duel. While the duel seemed to shift into Vader's favor, he was taken aback when, against all odds, Obi-Wan actively lowered his impenetrable guard and willingly let himself be killed by Darth Vader. Obi-Wan's disappearance into the Force marked the first Jedi of the modern generation to perform such an incredible feat, something that even Darth Vader himself, despite his mastery of the Force, had never seen nor heard of. So, we know how Obi-Wan Kenobi did this, but how did Vader react to this occurrence? How did this affect Vader's mental state going forward, and in what ways did Kenobi actually win this final duel? Well, today, students of the Force, we will answer that question. Until now, the art of manifesting one's consciousness after death had not been seen for centuries in Star Wars lore, and was only recently rediscovered by Master Qui-Gon Jinn before his ultimately untimely death at the hands of Darth Maul on Naboo. Though his training was incomplete, he was able to teach Yoda how to perfect this maneuver, who subsequently, as well as Qui-Gon Jinn, taught the same thing to Obi-Wan Kenobi, though Vader was completely unaware that this feat ever existed in the first place, with it being somewhat of a secret between these three Jedi Masters. This meant that there was only ever 3 modern Jedi who had any experience with this ability, one of whom was already dead, and the other 2 were in exile outside of Vader's reach. In the moments leading up to their final duel encounter, Vader was already weary of his rematch with Kenobi, as he had been bested by Obi-Wan twice before. Not only had he been beaten, but he had been utterly crippled both times by his master, and this led to Vader being on his guard for the duration of their entire duel. His defense was the strongest it had ever been in combat, and his approach to the duel was already drastically different from any other battles up until this point in time, because this battle was different. This time, Darth Vader feared Obi-Wan. He confined Obi-Wan strategically into tight spaces, on even ground in a space that gave Vader every physical advantage in order to turn the fight in his favor. And according to the novelization of A New Hope, Vader was actually afraid for his life during this duel. Vader believed that Obi-Wan stood on a legitimate chance of beating him at any moment in time, just as he had 2 times prior, and he had ample reason to do so, given their prior 2 encounters, and where it left him. From this point, Obi-Wan was already in Vader's head, and this is the maneuver that Kenobi would continue to use against Vader: psychological warfare. Seeing his old master as a frail old man, however, gave Vader a sense of peace and relief, and he finally cornered Obi-Wan in the halls of the Death Star. Obi-Wan, however, had one last trick up his sleeve, and actively let himself be killed by the blade of the Sith, an opening which took Vader without hesitation, but still at the same time off guard. Darth Vader struck true with ferocity, only to find his master disappearing without a hint of what had ever been there in the first place. This was the next step towards getting into Vader's mind and poisoning his confidence and self-assurance, which paid off expertly for Obi-Wan. In this moment, Vader was not only confused and taken aback, but for the first time in the very few times in his life, Vader was actively worried. Seeing one of the most powerful Sith Lords in history nervous for the first time marked just how powerful this mental manipulation by Obi-Wan truly was. And this is why, debatably, Obi-Wan actually won all 3 duels. His last trick wasn't ever designed to physically defeat his former apprentice at all. The initial confusion took effect when he poked at Kenobi's discarded robe, but the fear set in when Vader considered what this might mean for him. Despite the years he had spent mastering the Force and learning all of its possible powers as a Jedi and a Sith, he had never seen anything like this before, which meant that the Jedi now had secrets that Vader himself had never seen, and he was left to wonder what this trick might have meant. After all, Obi-Wan let himself be killed for a reason, lowering his weapon and allowing himself to be executed. Yet Vader had no idea why he could possibly wish to do this willingly. As Vader would later come to find out though, Obi-Wan achieved what Anakin never did, using the Force to avert death. and using the very same power that Anakin once sought so desperately in order to save the life of his wife, something that Obi-Wan had discovered and he had not. Looking into Vader's thoughts, this put his entire allegiance with the dark side into complete question, as the light side did possess the power that he had always fought and sought. And although the Council had betrayed him by withholding this information, the fact that it even existed in the first place absolutely rocked Vader's world of view. But what this ultimately implied with Obi-Wan and his rivalry maybe matched this fear. The fact that he would never be sure if he could ever be Obi-Wan legitimately, which was one of the strongest goals that he had set for himself, and for good reason. Up until now, Obi-Wan Kenobi posed the single greatest threat to the Sith Lord, having eviscerated him twice at the near height of Vader's power, and Vader had to be sure that he was capable of beating Obi-Wan once and for all, which of course is a question that would never be answered for him. Vader needed to know how he would better Obi-Wan, and why he was better than Obi-Wan, and yet he would never get the chance. This time, more than any, as Obi-Wan was gone, but Obi-Wan was still the victor. Vader would never know that he was truly outmatched, or was able to overpower Obi-Wan in any way, and only now in death is Obi-Wan truly unstoppable. This is why Vader's thoughts here are so important. Kenobi never gave him the satisfaction, and among his astonishment for this ability, confusion, and fear, Vader was now left to doubt himself more than ever, having this confirmation stolen from him, as Vader was enraged and yet stricken with fear. This left Vader's mind to race, as he was incredibly uneasy, and he could only imagine what Kenobi had discovered during his exile. Although it could be said that Vader won the physical fight, Obi-Wan won the psychological battle, and largely came out on top of the rivalry overall. So to answer the question in layman's terms, the emotion that Vader felt was fear, disappointment, and rage. But anyway, students of the Force, what are your thoughts on this? And what are your thoughts on the surprising reaction that Vader had to Obi-Wan Kenobi disappearing? What are your thoughts on why he was so afraid of this, and yet at the same time so angry? And do you think that this makes sense? As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned on the channel daily for far more Star Wars lore, and may the Force be with you.